bit. First of all, in Florida at large, women make up 53% of all registered voters, and in the I-4 corridor, it's exactly the same. So again, we're a mirror of the state at large. And in terms of members of the parties, Democrats are the most, have the largest percentage of women registrants. 56% of Democrats are women. 50% Republicans are women. 49% no party affiliation are women. And the one group that women are outnumbered in is the minor parties. Yes, Ron Paul, we get it. So. In terms of unregistered voters, this is, I think, very interesting because in Florida, and this is nationally, there are actually more unregistered men than women. But here's the interesting thing, 45% of women are unregistered as well. So there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. Now going back to the swing part of the swing state, nationally, and this is a Gallup poll, excuse me, a Pew poll that was just done last week, shows that right now, among swing voters, which are critical in Florida, you have to get this group to win. Swing voters are heavily women. 63% of all swing voters, which would be people who move back and forth, are women. And women are traditionally late deciders in elections. So that's why you'll see all the ads the closer you get to election day focusing on female faces. A few things on women's reproductive rights. This was a National Journal poll that was just released. Actually, it was done by the Kaiser Healthcare Group. 3 in 10 American women believe there is a wide-scale effort to limit women's reproductive health choices and services. And to date, more than 40% of women have taken action on some sort of reproductive health issue in the last 6 months, whether that's donating money or contacting a local official. A little bit about reproductive rights and where it stands and how people are considering things this time out. The abortion issue is, the country has gotten a little bit more pro-life, as you're probably aware of. But among the gender breakdowns, 46% of women are pro-choice, and 46% of women are pro-life and 41% pro-choice. So that's kind of interesting. A lot of people don't realize that. Many of you are so passionate about your perspective that you really probably weren't aware of how different this kind of thing is. But here's the really interesting thing, is there's a huge generational divide, even among women, on views about abortion. So women 18 to 49 years old, 50% are pro-choice compared to 39% pro-life. But for women 50 and older, it's exactly the reverse. 37% of older women are pro-choice and 55% pro-life. So there's a huge generational divide on that. One of the most interesting healthcare questions that was of interest lately was requiring health insurance companies to cover contraceptives. Remember that issue? The country's pretty divided on that, but women are in favor of it, say yes, that should be the case, 47%, men against 53%, but women are very, very divided on that issue as well. Quickly, and I know my time's running out here, while we're focused on a lot of the healthcare issues and reproductive rights, the bottom line is there's not a poll in the country that shows that that's going to be the dominant concern of most people this time out. And this was a poll that was just done last week by Pew, which lists across time, but focused, this was April actually, what percentage of people think a certain issue is extremely important. I'm going to read to you the top 3 issues. The economy, 85% say it's very important. Jobs, 84%. The budget deficit, 74%. The bottom 3, out of a list of about 20, the bottom 3 are abortion, 39%, birth control, 34%, and gay marriage, 28%. So this is really one of those kinds of economic pocketbook elections, which you could make the link between some of the healthcare issues and that, but people are going to be focused more on the pay equity issues and such. Now, the final two things I'd like to talk about are the fact that when you look at what matters most and you look at what divides Americans the most, party by 18%, race by 12, income by 10, these are differences within different income groups, religiosity by 7, and the lowest one is gender. It is not the powerful cue that a lot of people think that it is, and a lot of these kinds of issues, there's not a whole lot of difference between men and women, as it turns out. Now, my last two things I promise here. What about the presidential wives? This is an exciting election. A lot of analysts have pointed out that people like both of the presidential wives, or possible one wife to be, but obviously Ann Romney and Michelle Obama are regarded very favorably by the bulk of the electorate, and women especially. Among women, Michelle Obama has a 59% favorability, Ann Romney 48%, but Romney has 23% that don't know enough about her to have an opinion. But my kicker of all of it is, who's the most popular woman in American politics today besides Pat Schroeder here? Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is at 66%, and there are a lot of analysts, myself included, that still think it's possible that she would end up as a VP if the Obama ticket is looking like it might be in trouble. Lest you think that Florida is not competitive, I have a great graphic. If you like the Huffington Post and you go onto their pollster website, they have the Florida trend lines. Florida is like this right now, and it will be till the end. And obviously women are going to make the difference in who wins. But I will end with just a couple other things that's really interesting. Right now, women are by far the largest user group in social media, so we expect the candidates to be using that a lot. But the bottom line is, the only real thing that I can say with certainty is that the I-4 corridor is still going to be the hottest place in Florida for campaigning. So hold on. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm sorry, I've got a little head cold, so if you can't hear me, holler. First of all, war on women. I kind of hate the word war. I think it's been so overused. But clearly, we have been insulted for a very long time, politically, and they get away with it. And I'm delighted to follow this distinguished professor here, because she tells you why politicians can get away with it. We tend to put everything else first, above our own concerns. That's how we were kind of, the culture is what it's told us to do. And so I must first of all say that having lived this and worked in this area for I don't know how many years at this point, I get very bored with it, because it's the same issues over and over and over and over. Because guys have found they can just run right over us, and at the end, it doesn't make any difference. They get away with it, and they get points from the people who really want to control those women. I don't know who these people are that are so frustrated and have to control women all the time that they want to. And it's going to be very hard for me to do a time limit, because as our group moderator was talking about, we met once in a golf cart, but then I dropped out of the class because the instructor said to me, I don't think golf is your game, because most people don't talk the whole time. So that's how we didn't get to know each other any better. So when I get warmed up on this, it's very hard for me to stay in control, because I just get crazed. All these things we thought we won turned out to be little beachheads that can wash away like that if you don't stand and fight for them. And it's very troubling. Let me just give you a couple things, because this wonderful young woman over here can do so much more about reproductive, and I'll just say ditto, ditto, ditto. But let's take the Violence Against Women Act. That was my bill, 1994. Very proud of it. The violence against women in America dropped 58% from 1994 until about 2 years ago. I don't think we've monitored it recently, but whenever the last statistics came in. So it was doing a pretty good job. It got re-upped 3 times, and of course this time they went nuts. no, we can't continue violence against women. This is a terrible waste of money, and we don't want to do this. Phyllis Schlafly had said from the beginning, it was nothing but a feminist plot to punish men. That kind of craziness. And, we kind of thought we put it to bed in 1994, but guess what? It's winning now. So this whole thing about progress being preordained is pretty terrifying. When we talk about war on women or assault on women, think of what people in the media have been allowed to say about women and never been called on it. You could not do this with any other group. There would be folks outside the radio or TV station screaming, yelling, and hollering. When I was there, I was constantly called a feminazi by dear Mr. Rush Limbaugh. Now, Nazi is a very, very heavy snarl word. And of course, there were many others that were also labeled that too, and now he's labeling young people sluts and everything else. The rhetoric goes on and on and on. And yet, somehow, as women, we don't really get our hackles up and say enough already. Who's going to listen to this? This is crazy. We don't treat people that way. Whereas if you were doing it with other groups, they clearly would, and they would make a huge impact. So I get very frustrated that women have not been more cohesive. If we were more cohesive, we would rule. Because we're not a minority group, for heaven's sakes. We really have all the power we can possibly want. Let's just talk about pay equity. Can you believe that went down in 2012? Almost every other industrialized nation has done much more on this than we have. When I first got into politics, we were trying to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. And yes, congratulations, over 50% of the population still can't get in the Constitution, but never mind, I won't go there. And we were all wearing 59-cent buttons because that's what women were getting. Well, now we're up to 77. Isn't that lovely? And what did the Republicans say? We don't want to pass this because, you see, it would just engender more lawsuits. Well, first of all, if I were a male, I'd want it passed because there could be a lot of employers that say, I'll just hire women because I don't have to pay as much, Or I used to always say, too, look, if the federal government wants to give me a deal where I get to take 25% off my income taxes, and if I get to pay, I get a 25% deduction on my rent and my groceries and okay, we can cut it. I'll stay at this 75% level. But nobody wants to do that. You get to pay full tariff on everything, but they aren't willing to say equal pay for equal work. For crying out loud, this is just outrageous that in this year, we still can't do that. So I don't know what the real issue is. Then you look at 2/3 of the elderly poor are women. So many of these voter restrictions in so many states are going to hurt them very badly. Because if they're not driving, they don't have a driver's license. They may not have obviously a passport, but they may not have a birth certificate. Furthermore, Congress has cut all sorts of the meals and housing and employment and things like that many of the elderly women were relying on. And of course, there's children. Oh my gosh. When I was in Washington, it always made me crazy. We would hear all these wonderful speeches about children and family and how child-oriented we are. But women and children are the first ones cut whenever they have to go after anything. They're cutting the WIC program, women, infant, and low-income families. Now, and we keep getting into these mommy wars, where if you're middle class or upper class, it's terrible if you go to work. If you are a single mom and low income, then it's terrible if you don't go to work. What is that message? It's either good for a mother to be home or it's not good for a mother to be home, or you try and get better child care for those who have to be away. Instead, we keep making it more and more difficult. So I really think, while I don't want to call it a war, I cannot believe American women are kind of sitting there and taking it. All these guys who keep saying they're running on the economy, they're running for the jobs, they're running for all this, The amendment, the first thing they've done, and I got a list here forever, when they've taken over these state houses, is gone after women at 100 miles an hour. That's their first thing. They come after the uterus, they come after elderly care, they come after, Maryland ended all money for low-income preschool kids because they said the mother should be at home. However, they've also cut welfare. Now, I mean, that kind of insanity. And, if we're not sisters, if we're not our sister and brother's keepers, then okay, they're going to keep doing it. And they've been doing it as long as I've been there. So I feel a little like Paul Revere saying, "For crying out loud, women, wake up." Anyway, before I go on and on and on, I'm sorry, my time is up. But I'm really glad you're having this, and I really hope a lot of us go out and seriously talk to other women. It's got to stop, I think, or we're going to reach the terror that's happening.
So I also want to echo your comment. Thank the lead for allowing us to have this conversation here today, because it is such an essential conversation that we have. So I thought I would start my time. Is it okay? Can you hear me? Okay. So I thought I would start my time by sort of talking about what Planned Parenthood is, who we are, and what we do. Most people in this room know what Planned Parenthood is, but there is a lot of misunderstanding, I think, across the country about who we are and what we do. And the reality is that Planned Parenthood is the oldest and largest provider of affordable women's and reproductive health care in the country. And we currently provide every year over 2.5 million women with access to care that they would not otherwise have if Planned Parenthood wasn't there. 97% of our services are preventative health services like breast and cervical cancer screening, family planning services, well-woman exams like Pap smears, and treatment for infection-resistant infections and pre-cervical cancer lesions. 3% of what we do is abortion care, which is, of course, all anybody wants to talk about. Locally, we provide care to 16,000 men and women every year, and through a 12-year partnership with Orange County Public Schools, we provide abstinence plus and comprehensive information to teens about pregnancy and STD prevention. So the political climate for us is really challenging because it really threatens our very ability to do what we've always done for 95 years, which is care for women and families. There are attacks basically everywhere we turn these days. At the national level, the attacks actually are not really focused on abortion anymore, but they're focused on our ability to provide contraceptive care to families. There are a couple of ways that that's playing out. One is through the Affordable Care Act, which just recently, and it was a huge victory, treated contraception as basic preventative services for women and enabled, in 2014, women to have access to contraceptive services, birth control, with no copay. And of course, now that's playing out, and there's a huge fight over whether or not that provision is going to be stripped out because a small fringe minority group of the population opposes birth control. And Planned Parenthood's position is that it doesn't matter who your employer is. Birth control is essential preventative care for women, and whether or not you have access to birth control should have no bearing on what your employer thinks about birth control. It's preventative care. We haven't had these conversations since 1965 about birth control. I mean, I feel like we're living in a really bad episode of Mad Men. And then the other way that this is sort of playing out is with Title X, which is the nation's only family planning program, which was signed into law by President Nixon to provide access to women and families to family planning services. Because for every $1 we spend on family planning services, we save $4 in the cost of health and social costs that are caused by unintended and unwanted children being born. Birth control is a huge economic benefit to women individually and to society at large. And since birth control has become available, Maternal mortality has gone down dramatically. Children are healthier, and it's all a result of children being born into families where they were planned, and where they're wanted, and where they're loved. And then, of course, the state attacks on reproductive health are just something that you hear about constantly. Since 2010, there have been 2,000 bills introduced at the state level that pertain to reproductive health, and well over 90% of them are attacks on women's health. They play out in all kinds of different and creative ways. We're frankly shocked every year that they came up with something new, that there's some new, creative, bizarre way to attack women and prevent Planned Parenthood from providing care to our patients. In 2011 in Florida, there were 18 anti-choice bills that were filed in the Florida House. We have one person up in Tallahassee working on that. 18. It's such a divide and conquer type of a thing at that moment, because all of us are looking at our budgets. We're all struggling to make sure that we can provide care to our patients, and then at the same time, we have to work on fighting 18 bad bills and educating our legislators about how exactly these bills would hurt women in their communities. In Florida, we got a mandatory ultrasound bill in 2011. We already have a very, very restrictive parental involvement for abortion bill and law. And there are new and creative bills every day. A lot of states across the country are also looking at, you've probably heard about the personhood bills, which are not an attack on abortion. At the end of the day, they're also an attack on birth control, because there are a number of forms of birth control which theoretically may have some hypothesized impact on a fertilized egg, maybe. And with the personhood bill extending full legal rights to a fertilized egg, the same rights that all of us in this room enjoy, it really puts that fertilized egg's legal rights above the legal rights of the woman where it is located. So it's really scary, because we've known for years in Planned Parenthood that this was not just about abortion, that this was never about abortion. This is about women's health, and this is about women's autonomy. There is no more liberating health service in the world than the birth control pill, and absolutely this is something that we need to fight to protect, because women need access. And the one last thing that I'll mention before my time's up is that in Florida, as a result of that terrible 2011 legislative session, we also are now facing an amendment on the ballot in November, which is ballot initiative 6, Amendment 6, which is just another attack on women's health. And it's a deeply, deeply dangerous and flawed amendment, which makes no exception for a woman's health, and would strip certain healthcare coverage from public employees that currently have it. So just an example, if a nurse who was a public worker had cancer and her doctor recommended that she end a pregnancy in order to receive life-saving services that she needed, her insurance would be barred from covering the services that she needed to end her pregnancy. I think one thing that's really clear to me, even in light of all of the polling that's been done, is that it doesn't matter how people identify on the issue of pro-life or pro-choice. What's deeply apparent is that the vast majority of people recognize that, yes, abortion is difficult and complicated, and we have many varying opinions and feelings about it, but at the end of the day, this is not a government decision. This is a personal decision, and it's a decision that should be made by a woman with her family and faith, and in consultation with her doctor. This is not something where Rick Scott or anyone in Tallahassee or at the national level should be making private, personal decisions. This is not a political issue, and it shouldn't.
I would like to propose something, if I might. I would like to ask Jenna if she thinks it would make a difference if we could get a bill through that mandated uterus transplants for all male legislators.
Well, let me ask you, I have a couple of questions that I had prepared in advance, but after hearing some of the statistics that Dr. McManus just provided, what's the logic in all of this campaigning and all of these activities going? Because if women are such critical voters, but these initiatives are moving forward, it seems to me they conflict. Can somebody, one of you, walk us through that?
The bottom line is that women are not cohesive politically. Certainly there are, more women that are Democrats, but in terms of turnout and all that, it's pretty much an even field. And the problem is one of the slides, one of the things I was talking about is that party is really the major unit where people come up with their political ideas. And so right now, everything, in fact, you've probably seen a headline last week, America has never been as polarized politically in the history of polling, which is 50 plus years, as it is right now. So people are looking at, right now, if you're a Republican woman, you think the war on women is coming from Democrats because they are challenging some of your religious beliefs, etc., etc. Conversely, if you're a Democrat, you're absolutely convinced the war on women is coming from the Republicans. When you have a divided country politically, and women are divided themselves, you're bound not to be able to formulate the kinds of policies that everyone is applauding. And it's not going to be any easier because I guarantee you, well, I don't guarantee anything in politics, but it certainly looks like it's still going to be a divided Congress at the end of the 2012 election. And everybody is refusing to look at any issue, any of these elected officials, because you have to get elected with a party view, and you have to hold on to it when you get to these governing bodies like the Congress and the legislature. And meanwhile, policies just flounder and retrogress, and people get frustrated on both sides of the aisle.
I think there's been a sea change, too, in how a lot of the legislative bodies work. When I was there, I was the co-chair of the Congresswomen's Caucus with Olympia Snowe. We were bipartisan. We were the largest bipartisan caucus on the Hill. We let men in that had good voting records, and we got a hell of a lot done. The minute Gingrich came, he blew it up and said there'd be no more of this in Mickey Mouse. And if I would even be talking to a Republican woman on the floor, people would come over and tell them to get over on their own side, and that side has got so much more discipline than the side I was on. Will Rogers used to say it very clearly. He even belonged to an organized party. He was a Democrat. But what's really happened, at least in Congress and I think in many of the state legislatures, is it's almost like a parliamentary control that we've never had before. And that is, you vote with us all the time or you're out of here. And it's very painful. I mean, so people like Olympia Snowe say, well, forget this, I'm out of here. Because if you don't vote with them, you never get a committee, you never get anything, you just hang around and they can run people against you and so forth. And the Democratic Party, they threatened you with running someone against you. You thought, well, you haven't got any money to give anybody anyway, so what's the big deal? Yeah, but that has been such a huge change, and that's why people don't even look, a lot of members don't even look at what some of these things do, because they just, somebody stands at the door with their thumb up or their thumb down on their side, and that's how they vote, and they leave, because otherwise you're in big trouble. And one bill that's on the floor, that's been introduced in Congress that just makes me crazy, exempting hospitals from any liability if they don't give a woman an abortion when it's supposedly a life-saving thing and she dies. I mean, what? How can you get so crazy? But that's the kind of stuff people are passing, because thumb up, thumb down, and you got to stay with the group, stay with the group or they'll run someone against you. And we have seen it in many of these primaries lately. I mean, you all think of Patch of Utah as a great liberal, right? No, but he's got a tough primary, and we could go through it. So it's a different environment too.
Well, and I also think it's worth noting that nobody campaigns on these issues, right? It's not like they announce, I'm running for office because I think that, you know, women should have a transvaginal